Welcome back to Task Time Energy, the purpose-filled productivity podcast. My name is Scott Miller. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode. We've been talking with my friend Matt Kalush. Matt has years of experience working in the construction industry as an electrician and project manager. Back in 2014, Matt and his wife Amara spent a year and a half driving around North America, visiting 42 states and 4 Canadian provinces in a quest to decide where they wanted to live. They settled in Alaska, where they live now. In our last episode, Matt talked about that trip and told us what it's like to live in Alaska, where, because they're so far north, the sun is only up for 4 hours a day in the middle of winter, and the seasons change at an incredibly fast rate in spring and fall. Matt also talked about a 21-day sailing trip that he and Amara made along with a couple of our other friends on a 40-foot sailboat sailing from Mexico all the way to Hawaii. Now, in part 2 of this episode, Matt is going to share some of the important lessons that he's learned from these experiences and from other experiences that he's had in life. Let's hear what he has to say.
When you're in a situation like that, and, we get out of our normal environment, right? Our normal daily routines at home, at work, and you get into such a different situation. Like you're on a boat sailing across the Pacific Ocean out of sight of land. And there's a whole routine of, when you're sailing a boat. So there were 4 of you on the boat. So you're on watches, right? You're on shifts, sailing, watching out for, a couple people are sleeping, and then you got somebody watching out for other boats and making sure the boat's still heading the right direction, right? There's a whole routine. But I'm curious of what you would say about how, like, your sense of time shifted while you were out there on the water, and how it was different from like normal everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of just went out the window, right? So we played around with the different shifts and what worked best for us. And we ended up coming up with a schedule that worked pretty good. And it was basically 3 hours of watch, and then you were off, for 6 hours. So the sense of time goes out the window, really, other than, hey, when do I go back on watch? Right. Your whole sleep schedule's off. Everything is different. It's completely not what we would do in an everyday day-to-day scenario, living and working, on land. There was times where it's like, man, am I eating breakfast or am I eating lunch or what, is this dinner time? Or it kind of really didn't matter. You just ate when you were hungry and you slept when you could sleep. If you, weren't at work, a lot of people, or like, oh, I'm so jealous you're getting to go do this. What a cool vacation. And oh man. And I'm like, you guys don't understand how much work this is. This isn't like getting on a cruise ship, man, where you can go to the ice cream bar, 24/7. You're basically at work. It's not really a vacation, other than it's work that most of us have never done before, which makes it a unique situation and a completely different environment.
I mean, I've never done an ocean crossing like that on a sailboat. I've done a couple fairly long trips, 10 days, 2 weeks, like, the one you and I did down in the British Virgin Islands with a group of our friends, which was really awesome. But even in that, even though like we're totally within sight of land most of the time, right? I mean, there was an hour there where we did that one crossing, we're out of sight of land. So it's not like hardcore ocean crossing sailing. Yeah. But also, it makes me think of the cross-country driving trip that I did when I was working for Performance Designs back in the 90s, right? And we drove across the whole Western US, 7 months out on the road. Thinking about that reminds me of, your driving trip that you and Amara did, and how your sense of time like relaxes. I mean, that was my experience with that, is that when you get out of your day-to-day routine and you're on a schedule, like when we were doing this driving tour, we had places to be. It's like, okay, we've got to drive, from wherever. We're in Texas now, and we've got to be on the other side of New Mexico in, this many days. So there's a schedule and there are priorities and there are demands on your time. But when you're out of your normal 9 to 5 daily routine that so many of us are used to, it's like time relaxes to a certain extent. We don't feel that same time pressure.
Oh, I agree.
On the present time pressure. Yeah. I mean, what was your experience with that?
So, I mean, exactly kind of what you just said, Scott. I mean, when you're on the road or you're on a sailboat, you're not in your normal environment where the stress levels are elevated and time is everything. You know, I got to get the kids to school. I got to go do this. I got to, it's not as manic as that. It's like, okay, this is the objective and I have this much time to do it. So what's the best way to go about it? It's just, it's more relaxed, I guess would be the word I would use. And yeah, everything has to get done, but it doesn't have to be putting out a fire the whole time. The sailboat example, it's like, okay, we had 5 weeks to make this happen. Was it in the back of our mind the whole time? We're on the 6th day in Mexico getting stuff ready before we even pushed off. It's like, gosh, we need to get going, because we have to get back to this normal life. Like that's the reality, and this is the mission. So we only have so much time to do it. So that was always, lingering on the front end and even during the trip. And when we pushed off and got outside a sight of land there, and, when it comes down to, back to like how you felt about the time, it's just, there's an objective and there's so much time to do it, and how you choose to approach that mentally, that's on you. That's not on anybody else. So for me, I've always been very fortunate in the way that I perceive time and manage it, and try not to get to a point where it turns into stress, because that's not what I want in my life. And when I was doing big construction work, I couldn't control that. And I think that was the biggest thing that drove me out of it. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy the challenge, that I didn't enjoy the people, that I didn't enjoy the work, that I wasn't fulfilled at the end of these projects. It was that I couldn't control all of my time and stress that was going into it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that. Like, what are some maybe examples or ways when you say you couldn't control your time and stress? Like, I think it'd be interesting for people to hear a little more about that.
Well, you're on someone else's schedules and somebody else's deadlines, and there's too many moving parts for you to be able to control it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can try to plan to control it, and then when it doesn't work, you can choose how you react to that. Most people, it just turns into stress.
Right.
And I think for a lot of people, having their expectations managed and setting realistic objectives is really important.
Mm-hmm.
If you go into a situation with your expectations in an area that are unachievable, you're already set up for failure before you even step through the door.
With big construction projects, it's not just like one person's timeline that you have to worry about. You've got multiple timelines, you've got multiple moving pieces, you've got different contractors coming in doing different jobs, and any one of those timelines could get knocked out of sync with the others.
And they always do.
They always do.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. It's a beast. It's an animal. It's growing, moving, running. I mean, yeah, and that there's a lot of professions that are that way.
Yeah.
So understanding that you have an expectation. I mean, we all have to get our job done, right? So, but how you go about it mentally and how you prepare for it, and what you expect at the end of every day. I mean, it has to be realistic.
It's really interesting what you were saying about expectations and being in that project management role and being in the construction world where so much is, outside of your control. There's so much unpredictability. And I think a lot of us who are in those kind of situations, a lot of people working in those kind of situations, maybe allow ourselves to set unrealistic expectations, or maybe there are these outside expectations, these artificial expectations that people set. And I know it can be really useful for people to just step back and say, listen, I'm going to look at the reality of this situation as it is, as it exists, not as I want it to exist, not based on this artificial expectation, but let's look at the situation as it is and set expectations based on that. And I think people who are able to thrive in those kind of environments, it seems like they're able to do that. And that's something that helps. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. When you're in management or leadership, I mean, Scott, we've been around long enough. There's been we know good managers and we know really bad ones. And a good manager, leads by example. There's a ton of, examples of that, but being able to evaluate the situation at what it is and being able to course correct and constantly reevaluate it and set obtainable goals for people that make them feel good, and I'll use construction as an example. If I go in and I've got 100 guys working underneath me and we're working on a project and I take my, 6 or 7 leads and sit them down in the room in the morning meeting and say, okay, this is what I need to have done today. If that's not obtainable, doesn't make them feel good. It doesn't make the other guys feel good because they're just getting stressed out because I'm setting an unreachable goal every single day for them. And it just, that doesn't work. So being able to evaluate what is achievable goals and realistic goals and saying, okay, guys, it'd be great if we could get to this point today. And it'd be really awesome if we could get to this point, but I know you'll get to this point. So let's just see how the day goes. And, we'll talk again tomorrow. I found going about it that way, not only did they appreciate it better, that I wasn't harping on them about time and getting things done. It was, we had open dialogue about it. It was like, yeah, okay, well, I think we can get to there today, but we got this guy that might hold us up, this other trade, he's outside of our thing. And it's like, okay, well, if that happens, what are we going to do? Oh, well, we can jump over here and do this for a while and, kind of, make a little progress here. And it's just, that is how you manage time, right? Like, how can you be as productive with what you have? That's within your control.
Right. And expecting that things are not going to go according to plan, right? Expecting some things that are going to be off or that are going to interfere, and then just accepting that that's going to happen and say, okay, what can we do when that happens? Rather than complaining about it when it does happen, acknowledging that setting realistic expectations. Yeah, I can see that would be really valuable.
Yeah, and you got to have plan B because nothing goes as planned, right? Like, and you got to have plan C.
I haven't been involved in the construction world the way that you have, but I've done a little bit of when I was left one job and looking for another one, thinking about my next career, and a buddy of mine who does carpentry or renovations or something would say, hey, I need a helper next week. You want to make some money, or being around other people, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, people who do that kind of work. And I know this isn't always 100% the case, but there are a lot of situations where people in those trades, like you show up early in the morning, you go to work, you take off a half hour for lunch, and you're not working during lunch. You're taking your lunch break, eating your lunch, taking your break. You get back to work, and then 5 o'clock, we're done, right? It's like we are done working.
Rolling cords up at 4:45 is most guys feel,
Yeah.
Clean it up, put the tools away, lock in the job box, and when that clock strikes 5, we're out.
And there are different reasons for that, right? Some of it has to do with overtime and things like that, sure. But it's interesting that some people are really disciplined about that, right? And it can be different when you're running your own business. You might decide that you want to work late one night because you're going fishing the next day, right? But sure. There are situations where people are really disciplined about time that way, and they still get the work done, and they understand that that's the environment they're working in. And they set expectations around that, and things still get done. Because then you have people who do, we have desk jobs, and I'm somebody with a desk job, right? And it gets really easy to get into this grind where you're working 16-hour days, and it's 11 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning, and you're still working, or you're working on weekends or whatever. And people look at that as like being productive. But I think there's a way of looking in that and saying, well, is it just lack of discipline, right? Are you doing that by choice, or are you just letting that happen?
I think with the new shift in the workforce, especially working from home, we're going to see a lot more of this. there's going to be a lot of people that are like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to, kind of clock in till, 9 a.m. this morning. I'm going to get the kids out to school and have a cup of coffee or, run to the grocery store or whatever. They're starting to get this flexibility in their typical 9 to 5 workday. But on the flip side of that, they're going to be working till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And when they start getting into that routine, they are a creature of habit, and it's going to be tough for them to manage that. So I think as this workforce is changing and as, more people are working from home, they're going to need to put a lot of thought into it on the front end. I mean, everybody kind of got thrown into it. That wasn't into it before, right? Like just these last couple of years. And it wasn't planned. It wasn't orchestrated. It was just like, okay, this is what you have to do if you want to keep working. And then it's like, okay, now I'm forced to try to figure out, how do I do this? I've got kids at home, or I've got, the dog barking, or, I'm not set up to work at home. It's probably an extremely stressful situation for a lot of people to try to figure out how to adapt to this new workforce, especially when the kids were out of school, when everybody was homeschooling and stuff. I mean, what a disaster for a lot of people in our country, and worldwide. But I think it's important that you set boundaries, right? Like you're saying, instead of working until, 11 o'clock at night because you're just sitting there on your laptop and, sending emails, checking things, Googling stuff, preparing for the next day. You just got to set a boundary and say, okay, it is 5 o'clock. I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm shutting the computer off. I'm gonna go for a walk. I don't remember whoever told me this, but there was a math equation that a gentleman told me. It was back when I was stressed out working, and basically he said, how old are you? And I told him. And he says, well, how old do you think you're going to live to? And so I don't know. And I told him. And he says, all right, well, that's 30 more years, for example. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And he's like, well, that's 10,950 days, young man. How are you going to use them? And I'm like, 11,000 days? That's it? Like, think of that like in currency, or, right? It's not a very big number. And I've used that example with some friends of mine, especially when people start getting close to retirement and stuff. And it's like, man, that number gets really small.
Yeah.
So, which, exacerbates the fact that you can't buy time. You need to try to manage it. You need to try to live a happy life. I mean, all this stuff kind of goes hand in hand, and you need to figure out how to live a quality of life that, suits you best.
Yeah. Yeah. Like $11,000. Yeah. It sounds like a lot of money until you say, okay, now that's all you have. Right? That's it.
You
How
can't
are you
make
to spend it. Yeah. What are you going to do now?
Yeah. That's it. That's all you got.
Yeah. So, and quality of life is so important, and I think often undervalued, but quality of work too, right? Like if you're doing heavy, man, you're carrying around bags of cement all day. Like there's a certain point where you have to set limits because you don't want to hurt yourself, and you got to be able to get up tomorrow and do it again. Right. Yeah. And I think when we're doing mental work, we don't necessarily think of it that way. We don't notice when your performance is actually decreasing because you're exhausted, because you've been, staying up till 1 o'clock in the morning working on spreadsheets and then getting up at whatever, 6 o'clock and doing it again. Right. Like, so, I think there are some really valuable lessons in there, but I think that what you're bringing up, Matt, is the really important one. Is we only have a certain amount of time. Right. And we always think, oh yeah, there'll be, I'm working for later, working for that carrot dangling out in front of me where that someday I'm going to enjoy, that bucket of ice cream in the refrigerator that someday I'm going to enjoy. Yeah, and like there's someday is every day. How are you living today? Right.
Yeah. And, I'll go back to like the quality of life or comforts of life. Like everybody needs to make money. Most of us aren't trust fund babies and things of that nature. Right. So when I did this restructure, or my wife and I did this restructure, we looked at it as a business, Scott. And what I mean by that is, how much overhead does your business have to run? Right. if you're an entrepreneur or, you own your own business, you have overhead, you have gross income, you have net profit. I mean, it's all, doesn't matter what industry you're in, right? So I looked at our life that and was like, okay, I have a quality of life, a standard that I want to live. Okay. I want to be able to take a vacation or two a year. I need to be able to pay my mortgage. I need, we got to have cell phones. But I looked at it mathematically and said, okay, I need to make this much money to live this lifestyle. How do I do that in the least amount of time? And a lot of people don't look at it that way. A lot of people, there's no secret. The more money you make, the more you'll spend. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's never enough, ever. So when I started thinking about it, it's like, okay, well, I'll just come to terms with that. I'm cool with it. It's good. So how much do I need to live this lifestyle? And we restructured based on that concept. And it was the best thing that we ever did for ourselves.
Wow. That's awesome. That's an awesome way to look at it. I hope that people are like listening to this, nodding their head right now going, oh yeah, like that's a really good way to look at it. Cause yeah, I would agree. Like, I think there are probably very few people who look at things that way. And absolutely, we think about just, let me make more money. Like, what's the next raise? What's the next, my next financial goal? But yeah, the more you make, the more you spend.
Yeah, I got some little extra money laying around. I'm going to, go out to another dinner, or, you just spend it. It comes and goes. Right.
Right.
So, but if you can structure, for me, it was like, I just want to structure my life to live this standard.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I can do this. It's achievable. It's an expectation that's set right where it should be, and I wish more people would value the time that they have, especially in their younger years where they have the physical abilities to do things, and really take advantage of that time and not worry about the financial impacts at the end of it, because none of us have the crystal ball. We never know when the end is.
Yeah.
We all want to be comfortable and retire at some point. Yeah, I understand that, but there's an algorithm in there that you can work on, and everybody's into unique situations, right? That they might be able to, cook it just a little bit different to where they bring them more happiness. Because that's what really this is all about. For me, it's all about living life to the fullest.
Yeah. I'm going to plan for my future. There may be a day when I don't want to work anymore. And I may live 20, 30 years beyond that or whatever, but that doesn't mean I have to completely sacrifice and undervalue my happiness today. Where do we find the balance? Yeah.
And it's always easier to say stuff than to actually do it, right? Or when you're giving advice to your friend, when you're looking from the outside in. But I think even if people, listen to this, but even if they get some thinking a little bit outside of the normal that they've been thinking, I think it's a great success. But it just seems more and more the world's getting to where expectations are set way too high on people. Stress levels are up. I think it's up to us, people like us, the average people, to try to say, okay, let's look out for number one in our family and our neighbors and our community. And, how can we just start at that base level and work from there? This global world with technology and stuff, it seems like there's a lot of unhappy people out there right now. And the only way to change that is if people start finding happiness themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when we do that, we're setting a good example for other people too, right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
So Matt, I want to be respectful of your time, because I know y'all are getting ready to go on a boat trip for a few days.
Yeah.
But I have two more questions for you.
Sure.
One is, so as a business owner, as somebody who is, you're running your own business, you're working hard, but yet you're trying to maintain this wonderful balance and between working, meeting your needs of your family, and still enjoying life. What's like one piece of advice you would give to somebody who is maybe in that similar situation and trying to strike that same balance? One practical piece of advice.
I mean, I think the biggest thing, Scott, was that financial thing that I discussed, where it was like, you're never going to have enough money, but you'd have to have enough money.
Mm-hmm.
So figure out that value to yourself and set that as an expectation, as a goal. And you're going to find out real quick if you can achieve it or not. And if you can't achieve it, then guess what? You got to kind of restructure your lifestyle to a goal that you can achieve. Right. And if you do that, I feel like you'll have more free time, you'll have a better quality of life, and you'll probably perform way better at whatever it is you're doing as an entrepreneur or as a business owner.
I'm gonna sit back down and take another look at that myself. That's really good advice. I'm glad we had this conversation. So man. my one other question is, and if you don't want to answer this or you don't like the way the answer comes out, we can totally edit this out. But I like asking. This is my question that I'm asking everyone.
This is the loaded gun. I got it. It's coming.
What right now is your big dream?
Oh, I ask myself this question, I wouldn't say daily, but probably weekly. And it is a very, very, very difficult question to answer. I have lots of dreams, right? And I have lots of things I want to work on and lots of things I want to do, lots of places I want to go see. But you know what? Honestly, I've kind of come to terms with is I'm living the life that I want to live. So that is my dream. So is there things I want to do? Is there things I want to improve on? Is there places I want to go? Absolutely. But I am living the dream that I've created for myself.
That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I hope you and your wife are able to continue living that dream and living that life and experiencing that and making that your reality. And it just gets better and better. I hope that gets better and better with practice for y'all.
Yeah. No. And, I'm super fortunate. We're super fortunate. So we have that, which, anytime I get down and out and start, questioning it, I just remember, man, you can't buy time, and I'm spending it the way I want to spend it. And that's a dream to me.
Thank you again for listening to our podcast. As we mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, Matt and I have been friends for many years. I've been on some very fun adventures with him and his wife, Amara, and I always enjoy talking with Matt and hearing about his latest adventures and just hearing his thoughts about life. And I'm glad that you had the chance to enjoy this conversation with us. As a professional coach, I love helping people make time in their lives for their own epic adventures. I enjoy working with people who are learning to set boundaries and learning to set realistic expectations for themselves so that they can spend their time in ways that they find valuable and meaningful. If you would like to know more, check out my website, scottmillercoaching.com, or send me an email. My address is scott@scottmillercoaching.com.